Hello and welcome back to the Napoleonic Wars pod, where we are returning with an installment of our Peninsular War series that's sort of semi-regular. Today we are looking at the Guerrilla War. Only you might think, well, hang on a minute, Zach, haven't we talked Guerrilla War before? Well, sort of, but not really. We've talked about the early phase of the Guerrilla War, and now we are back to continue the job. We are joined by Dr. Silvia Gregorio-Sainz, a long-standing friend of the show, who you will have heard on previous episodes talking about, funnily enough, the Peninsular War, or the Guerra de la Independencia, as they call it out in Spain, the War of Independence. Silvia is a lecturer in the English department at the University of Oviedo. She has a doctorate in English studies, and her research focuses on Anglo-Spanish relations in the first half of the 19th century, particularly during the Peninsular War and its aftermath. She's published a series of articles looking at British reporting on the Peninsular War in the press and the history of Cantabria during the period. And we're very hopeful that books will be forthcoming in the not too distant future. Fingers crossed, and let us know when that happens. Silvia, great to see you again. How are you doing?
Hi, Zach. Thanks for inviting me to the Napoleonics to talk about the Spanish guerrilla during the Peninsular War. It's a pleasure to be here again. And I must admit, I'm a bit out of my comfort zone. That's Anglo-Spanish relations and Cantabria, but I'll do my best.
You will do a superb job, as you always do,
Mhm.
Silvia. You know this. So where to begin? We're taking a slightly different format with this one. We're not going to going for the classic chronological structure. We're going to jump around different figures of the Peninsular War, the Guerrilla, the Little War. And we're going to break down these people's lives, talk about their roles within the war, talk about perhaps their lives after the war as well, because a lot of these folks go on to have significant legacies afterwards. And I think there are some really interesting themes that fall out of this. Things like their motivation behind resisting, which obviously varies from person to person, where they operated, the methods that they used, and also the nicknames. You know, there are some fantastic nicknames. We should probably try and work out what our guerrilla nicknames would be. Liam nods enthusiastically. Sorry, Liam, I've just been ignoring you in the first half of this interview, haven't I? Um, how are you? Are you okay? You are well?
I'm well, sir. Yeah, I'm dialed in.
Okay. Well, have a ponder on your your guerrilla nickname. Because I'm struggling to think of what your or my um, nickname would be, quite frankly. We'll come back to that. But let's start with some of these folks. And let's start with Agustina de Aragon. Um, now, this one's a bit of a difficult one because depending on who you read, some folks will tell you that Agustina de Aragon never existed and that she's sort of this propaganda creation and, just like,
Mhm.
no, none of that ever happened, which fine. But there's there's a lot of kind of people talking about Augustina, or at least an Augustina figure. So
Mhm.
I'm very curious about, firstly, what's your take on this? Was she real? And why is there sort of so much mythologizing and folklore about it? Is it sort of a representation of, look, even the women are fighting this war, so everybody buckle up, grab your nearest large stick if you haven't got a sort of functional weapon of the period, and get fighting because everybody's doing it. Is that what's at play, or is there something else there?
To start with, I supported, yeah, that she was real. And it's great to start this podcast with a woman, and not any woman, but Agustina de Aragon. However, even if the gorilla term is a cultural term, I would have never thought about her as included in this group, as included in the guerrilla. Maybe urban guerrilla, popular resistance, in her famous episode, but um. But after that, she fought in Aragon, in Catalonia, País Vasco as a soldier, as an officer in the Spanish army. I would have never included her in this guerrilla group. I was thinking about that difference between reaction and action. So she was reacting taking the lead at that time. But the guerrilla was something different, taking action, or at least that's how I see it. But let's start then by the beginning. Real data based on her official military record of service, because her life was amazing. So she was a real one. Or at least there's a real part in her. Then the mythology, the legend, romantic heroine is that too. So Agustina Raimunda Zaragoza y Domenech, that's the real name, was born in Barcelona, in 1786. She was married to an artillery corporal, Juan Roca, in 1803, and was in Barcelona when the Peninsular War broke, okay, el 2 de Mayo. She moved then to Zaragoza with her child because her husband had to join the army, and she arrived there on the 8th of June, and she was living next to the battery of Puerta del Portillo. Some sources say that she was living there with a relative, with her sister, but not sure about that. I couldn't confirm. The thing is that, so she was there when Zaragoza suffered the first bombardment by the Napoleonic troops. She was there, like many other women, providing supplies, provisions to those men fighting. And the battery was completely destroyed, and the French had an opportunity to enter the town by that battery. And Verdier ordered the assault on the 2nd of July. And the Napoleonic infantry under Gomez Freire was about to advance. And seeing that wounded and dead men could not offer resistance in Portillo, and that a 24-pounder had been prepared to be shot, she went there and did so. So she took the lead, deterring the enemy advance and delaying its entry in Zaragoza. So the city resisted against all odds. Then it was José de Palafox that appointed her artillerywoman. Other sources says infantry sergeant, giving her 2 military shoulder patches that he took from a dead soldier. And that was not all, because after that, she also took part in the fight during the second siege. She fought in the battery of Puerta del Carmen, dislodged the French from the convent of La Misericordia, but unfortunately he got infected with the plague, like Palafox, and then Zaragoza capitulated, and she was taken as prisoner to France. But she was able to run away. She ran away in Soria. She went to Teruel, and then she arrived to Sevilla. In August 1809, she was appointed by the Junta Central second lieutenant of artillery. And after that, she went to Cadiz, where she met Wellington. Wellington offered her as a present 2 pistols, if I remember it well. She also met Charles Doyle, Sir John Carr, and that was not all, because she kept fighting. She joined the army in Tortosa in 1811, and when Tortosa capitulated, she was again taken prisoner, but she ran away again, and she joined the Army of the North and fought in Vitoria 1813. So when the war was over, she went back to Zaragoza, and Ferdinand VII confirmed her rank in the army. She kept moving around Spain, from Aragon to Valencia, and she ended up in Ceuta, where she died in 1857 as an army officer. And there are 2 fantastic books talking about that. That's one from Elena Fernández. That's Mujeres en la Guerra de la Independencia. That's a pretty good one. There's information on that. And Guerra y Cuchillo, that's Daniela Aquillet. That's a fantastic one, talking about the sieges of Zaragoza and where she is mentioned. But that's the real data we have about her. But of course, she became a symbol of resistance. Going beyond gender roles, she fought, she defended the city, and then she turned into legend for that need for propaganda. So that myth was constructed to enhance morale, to transmit an idea that resistance in towns was possible. As you said, even led by women. So it was an example to follow. That's about Agustina. She was not the only one, and there are some women that we can say that they were guerrilla women that have been partially forgotten in that traditional narrative about the guerrilla because they belong to the domestic domain and they were breaking that, they were going into the public domain. And to name but a few, we have Dominica Ruiz de Vallejo. She was married to another really famous guerrilla leader, that's Alonso Ignacio Cuevillas. And she was really famous because she killed 3 French soldiers in Santo Domingo de la Calzada, in La Rioja. Then the other one is Francisca La Puerta, that was a key guerrilla figure in Toledo, La Mancha, Extremadura. And in 1810, she asked the junta for permission to lead her own guerrilla party. But the most famous guerrilla woman, I would say, is Martina de Ibai-Barriaga, La Vizcaína. And she is in that blurred line between patriotism and banditry. At the very beginning, she pretended to be a man. She joined the Spanish army and participated in several actions. But when she was discovered, she joined the party. She left the Spanish army and she joined the party of Jerónimo Merino Cop, El Cura Merino, in Burgos. And she participated then in the siege of Zaragoza too. So she was there. And then in 1811, she had her own guerrilla in the area of Vitoria. After that, she was accused of being abusing the population. So she was arrested by Mina, Espoz y Mina. I was cleaning that area. And after that, she fought together with Francisco de Longa y Antía, that's another guerrilla leader, at the end of the war. So she took part in the Battle of Vitoria too. And the surprising part comes here. Her bravery, that of La Vizcaína, was even praised by Wellington. So there are some lights and shadows in this figure.
So I've been having a bit of a ponder. We said earlier that we needed to think about guerrilla names. I haven't come up with one for Silvia yet, partly because it would be rude to insist on imposing a name upon her. But nonetheless, Silvia, if you've got an ideal guerrilla name in mind, then feel free to chip in with it. But I've been thinking about myself and Liam. I'm going to be really imaginative. Let's see if folks can work out the translation for this. I think my guerrilla name needs to be El Microfono. And yes, I did have to check the pronunciation of that. If you hadn't worked it out already, that's the microphone, because sometimes these names aren't overly imaginative. Like there's going to be a chaplain we're going to come across later, and I think you're going to know that it's the chaplain just from the name of said individual. When it came to Liam, though, I was thinking El Recreador. That was an attempt at Spanish pronunciation, which was frankly bordering on a hate crime. Liam, any ideas what El Recreador might be?
I have no idea. I couldn't even begin to guess.
It's very you.
Yeah, I agree on that.
It's the reenactor.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay. You seem to quite like that. I think next time I see you, you're going to have a hoodie that sells El Recreador on the back.
To be fair, in the margins, I've come up with four, and I know you shouldn't sort of title yourself, but I do have four. Maybe we could come back to those later in the show while I work on the
Mhm.
pronunciation in the background.
Okay. Okay. I promise we won't like hand notes to Sylvia, trying to sort of work out the pronunciation whilst also
Yeah.
running the episode. Sylvia, out of interest, have you figured out a Greer name for yourself?
No, never thought about that. I
Okay.
keep thinking on that.
See,
Not
I
sure.
should know what the teacher is in Spanish, but I don't because my Spanish is
The teacher.
it could work for you,
Okay.
right? Like, what is the L? It would be
La profesora.
la profesora. There we go. Problem solved. Like we answer all the really important questions on this show, as you can tell. Back to the actual business of what we're here to discuss, though. Um, next up, Francisco es Francisco Espoz y Mina. There we go.
Right.
Um, now, clearly, we're moving away from the women at this point. What's Espoz y Mina's um, narrative? What's his story? And is he the most important guerrero? Oh, no, my Spanish pronunciation tonight. Guerrillero
That was a difficult one.
of the Peninsular War.
Is he the most important guerrillero of the Peninsular War? He was one, I know he was one of the main guerrilla leaders, a key one for sure. But while reading Spanish sources, um, they seem to lean towards Juan Martín Díez, el empecinado, instead. I'm not sure if it's a question of perspective, maybe due to his exile in England, where he published his memoirs in 1825, that might have promoted that view of him in Great Britain. And in fact, it might be interesting to analyze that projection reception of guerrilla leaders in Great Britain. I'd love to do that, but I need time. Um, and then also Benito Pérez Galdós in his works Episodios Nacionales, National Episodes, might have had something to do in that because he placed um, El Empecinado in second place, Espoz y Mina in the first one. But I think that Spanish sources agree on having El Empecinado first. Not saying that Espoz y Mina was not important, he was a key figure, the guerrilla war. The thing is that the thing that should be highlighted about him is that he was still on the ball after the Peninsular War. He was fighting during the Liberal Triennium, he was fighting the First Carlist War, always fighting on the liberal side. So that's a good example of the heterogeneous nature of the guerrilla. Even if it has been traditionally and popularly assumed that the guerrilla leaders of the guerrilla had to be absolutists, most of them were not. And here we have an example of that. But let's focus a bit on his story. So his name was Francisco Espoz y Lundain. He was born in a small hamlet in Navarra, and he had to take charge of his family when he was 14 because his father died. So he had to work the land. There we can see the poor origins, okay, of those guerrilla leaders, the guerrilla. But we need to remember that that popular origin of the guerrilla is also part of that romantic myth. We need to remember that the elite also took part. They were part of the guerrilla. Above all of the being leading the guerrilla parties. So from August to November 1808, he was at the service of a French general in Pamplona. Okay, he had to leave his village. The reasons are not clear. Some sources say that because he killed a French officer. But the thing is that he was there at the service of French general in Pamplona, and he did not enlist until February 1809. And he did so in Jaca, that's Álava, in Doyle's battalion as a volunteer soldier, so the regular army. And after Jaca capitulated in March, he joined the Corso Terrestre de Navarra. That's an authorized, legalized guerrilla party led by his nephew. So here we can see a point in common with other guerrilla leaders. We can see a pattern, or at least I saw that while reading sources. Most of the guerrilla leaders and members first joined the regular army, and following the army's defeat, when they saw that the army could do nothing, they joined the guerrilla. So they changed kind of tactic. So yeah, he joined his nephews, Javier Mina, if I remember it well, guerrilla party. But had to take the lead in May 1810 when his nephew was captured by the French. And then that was the point when he added his father's second surname, Mina, to his name, or guerrilla name. And then he was busy eliminating other guerrilla parties, bands in the area, eliminating them, absorbing them. And that's why he was called the Little King of Navarre, or the Napoleon of the guerrilla leaders, because he absorbed, eliminated any other guerrilla party in the area. So in July 1810, his party was formed by 1,200 infantry soldiers, 200 cavalry ones, and he created the División de Navarra that was integrated in the regular army. And in 1812, he already dominated Navarra, Aragon, and part of the Basque Country, 12,000 men, and taking part in successful operations. And that launched his military career. So in June 1812, he was already second general of the 7th Spanish Army. So summing up his operations, he took 13 fortresses, arrested 14,000 French soldiers, and participated in 143 military operations. The question is, why did he join the guerrilla? 2 words summarize those reasons: patriotism and revenge. We might take into account that there is no homogeneous, have problems with those words, answer across guerrillas. Some self-defense, patriotism, revenge, survival, economic reasons, because surprisingly the guerrilla got paid while the regular soldier didn't get paid. The military promotion, it was easier to promote in the guerrilla. And the same happens with the origins, as I said before. But here, patriotism and revenge. That's what was stated about him.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Sylvia. We're going to keep rattling through these. So please, if you need to take a breath, you just let us know. But next up, we've got.
Hang on. Are we not getting your 4 assorted contenders for your guerrilla name, Liam?
Okay, well, I'll give you 1 or 2 maybe, but again, excuse the pronunciation. The first one I've got is El Abrigo Rojo.
The Red Rider.
The red coat, apparently.
Of course it is. Yeah,
it's pretty standard.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I'll give you another one real quick. El Jineta. Jinete.
Jinete. El Jinete.
Possibly. Quite, yes.
Okay.
I don't know what that one is.
Has to do with horses.
The cavalryman? Were you really that predictable?
Of course.
Is the next one going to be sort of the sword waver?
Yeah, well, it might be now. But we can come back to those. So, talking next about Francisco Abad Moreno, known as Chaleco, which is interesting. I'd quite like to know where that came from according to my Google Translate, what it means. But yeah, so where does his nickname come from, and what's his story?
Okay, so in this case, before we continue, I might need to say that when talking about the gorilla phenomenon, there are three main problems, three main obstacles. First, there's not much info about gorilla, well, far more about gorilla leaders because they than other gorillas. Second, not a heterogeneous group. And third, that romantic aura around them that make it difficult to look at the real person behind. So, and this might be one of those cases. Um, Chaleco, that was a really interesting one. Why chaleco? Chaleco in Spanish means waistcoat. So the nickname referred to the way he dressed. There is a portrait by Mariano Brandi where you can see that. So you see, not really original or creative. All those nicknames refer to physical characteristics, jobs, origins. They were not really creative at the time.
So what we've found here is the Guerrilla equivalent of the bow, right? I mean, tell me I'm wrong, listeners. We're always talking about Luke and his love of silk and a good three-piece suit. Like he is whatever the Spanish for three-piece suit is. That is Luke's nickname, quite clearly. Sorry, Silvia, you were about to sort of tell us something deeply historical, and I've now derailed everything entirely. Please carry on.
No worry, that was pretty important. So yeah, Francisco Abad Moreno, his name, according to what I read, was Manuel Francisco María Gregorio. Then suddenly Francisco Abad Moreno. He was born in Valdepeñas, that's Ciudad Real, Castilla-La Mancha, nowadays. Before it was Castilla-La Nueva. He was 20 when the Peninsular War broke, and thanks to his official military record service, which Ferdinand VII ordered to be printed, we can know that he joined the guerrilla because his mother and brother, other relatives, according to different sources, seem to have died during the assault to Valdepeñas in 1808. So here we have that shared aspect of personal suffering, revenge to justify them joining the guerrilla. So he initially joined the guerrilla parties of José Cacho, José Villalobos, taking active part in the defense of his own village. That's self-defense. First, I'm defending what's close to me, and then the country. And in February 1810, he created his own guerrilla party around 700 horses, which took action in that area, as well as in the area of Sierra Morena, from Castilla to Andalucía, even reaching Toledo and Madrid. So even if the guerrilla party was originated in a specific area with people from that specific area, their field of action was quite extended. He took part in 78 actions, intercepting correspondence, convoys, killing French soldiers, quite the same as the main guerrilla actions, that was attacking the army's rear, draining them, and monitoring the lines of communication. So in 1812, his party was integrated into the Second Spanish Army under Francisco Javier Elio as Regiment Cazadores de la Mancha, that's light troops. And although being part of the regular army then, he continued using guerrilla tactics. So in line with the discussion opened by several authors, I do have a doubt in here because can we still talk about the guerrilla or guerrilla when they have been integrated in the regular army? That's a doubt I always have. Wouldn't it be better to talk about regular units with guerrilla tactics? No, not sure about that. I do not have an answer. I usually use guerrilla to refer to them because I use British sources in my studies and they use guerrilla, so it's easy for me. But I find using it tricky or controversial because they have been integrated in the army. Yeah, it's so yeah. It's true that they have some kind of autonomy, independence while in the army, but then maybe we need to change that. Yes, regular army, guerrilla tactics. But okay. In connection to this, it's also important to highlight that Spanish authorities were trying to first legalize the guerrilla parties and then regulate them. So to avoid chaos, anarchy. Anarchy could be dangerous. It means giving power to the popular classes. That was not good. So they were trying to use them, but trying to control them at the same time. And that's why as soon as Ferdinand VII returned, he said, okay, no more guerrillas. It's enough. And he dissolved them in September. But yeah, that's the main thing. Again, like the other ones, El Chaleco, he fought on the liberal side during the liberal triennium. So we can see another example of that liberal ideology, even if they fought against the French, they fought for Ferdinand VII during the Peninsular War.
Can I stay with that kind of really interesting question that you raised there? I was very restrained. Can I just sort of ensure that everybody appreciates just how wonderful a podcast host I clearly was on that occasion, because I didn't immediately derail the conversation by diving on that? Because in the background to sort of running this, I was discussing with Liam about the next one we were going to look at, which is Julian Sanchez, El Charro. Julian Sanchez, sorry. And I have exactly the same question mark over whether or not Don Julian, as I call him, really counts. And can you really class him as a guerrilla leader? Because he spends a lot of his time serving fundamentally he's attached to Wellington for a good chunk of the Peninsular War. I believe his guys they're certainly at Fuente Donuro. I believe they're still with him by the time of Salamanca. You know, he has this long-standing kind of connection. And granted, there seems to be quite a big sort of cavalry element to that. Certainly when he's at Fuente Donuro, like predominantly he's in command of sort of cavalry that's observing that sort of far right overextended flank that position that sort of Wellington occupies. But nonetheless, that's regular army service, right? That's not the classic interpretation of the guerrilla, sort of hiding behind rocks on mountain passes, ambushing sort of lonely French cavalry patrols or whatever it might be. So to me, I think there is a sort of a sense in demarcating the two. This kind of goes back to what Charles Esdale's talked about in the past, doesn't it? About there are different types of what we mean in terms of sort of individual motivations. You know, some people who are called guerrilla are fundamentally bandits who are they're not just stopping the French, they're stopping anybody because they want to rob them of their money. Then you've got the patriots. Then you've got people serving, as you say, you know, fundamentally sort of detached army units or ex-army sort of maintaining an element of discipline. So I kind of wonder, is the term guerrilla actually unhelpful because of this kind of umbrella nature of, oh, somebody Spanish is doing resistance, they're a guerrilla? Have we basically been a bit too juvenile? And is there a way that I can blame Charles Oman for this in the kind of the classic way that he'd just kind of go, anybody doing resistance is a guerrilla?
That's quite a difficult question. Yeah, but I have found the same problem while using the term myself. In this case, yeah, I will describe him as a typical guerrilla leader. But it's true that most of the time he was in the regular army. Yeah, maybe we're using guerrilla to cover everything.
So how are the guerrillas referred to in Spain? Do you have this kind of difference in categorization? Yeah. Liam nods sagely, like if I hadn't asked it clearly, he would.
Yeah. The
Is there this difference in terms of these different sort of types of leader?
Yeah, um, but we do not usually use it. So we use the term, we know that there is a difference, that we've got partisans, corso, um, cruzados, religiosos, bandidos. So there are different, there's a difference within the guerrilla term. But most of the times when you read articles, chapters, they are referring to all of them as guerrilleros. So maybe the same problem you are mentioning happens in here too. So it's a general problem because maybe it's the problems in naming the thing, because it might not be a clear distinction between, in this case, at that time, between the regular army and the irregular fight. So as we do not know how to make that difference, we use guerrilla, as you said, just to cover that. Not sure if I'm answering the question or posing more questions, but I had the same doubt myself studying El Charro too. Not sure.
So from the sounds of it, I probably can't pin all of the blame on Charles Oman or John Fortescue, for that matter, which will disappoint some amongst the historiography nuts of the Peninsular War. But let's actually focus on Don Julian. Um, you know, talk me through his career. What do we know about Sanchez, El Charro, um,
Mhm.
and also kind of life beyond the war?
Okay. And don't you want to know what El Charro means?
Absolutely, we do.
I didn't know about this one. Um, and I was quite surprised because charro is an adjective or noun used in Spain to refer to people, mainly peasants, from Salamanca. I was quite surprised about that. Didn't know. Um, yeah, it's true that in Mexico they use it to refer to horsemen, to riders, but I don't think the connection is that. It's just because he was from Salamanca. So that was the thing I learned while revising or studying about El Charro. So as we said, he was a typical guerrilla leader. He was linked constantly to the Spanish army from the very beginning of the Peninsular War, even though he always combined both ways of fighting, so regular war. And this shows what we were talking about, that blurry line between irregular forces, which makes difficult to label the type of fight. But Julian Sanchez, El Charro, fought as a soldier in the War of the Pyrenees. So he was a regular soldier at the time, the War of the Convention. He fought in the infantry regiment Mallorca. So it was the same as El Empecinado. Um, they were regular soldiers before the Peninsular War. He was born in a small village between Salamanca and Ciudad Rodrigo in a well-off farmer family where he was responsible for the cattle. And the reason for him to join the guerrilla, it is said, and I'm not really sure about this, to avenge his parents' murder by the French. Or other sources say that it was that his sister was abused by an imperial soldier. But Antonio Moliner Prada notes that, like El Empecinado, those reasons might not be the real ones, and that it was just his experience as a soldier in the War of the Pyrenees and the psychological impact that had on him that made him join the guerrilla to fight against those revolutionary ideas. And it was in August 1808 when he joined the battalion of volunteers in Ciudad Rodrigo. So again, here we have the regular forces instead of his former regiment. And it makes sense. Why didn't he join the regiment Mallorca? Well, because I'm not an expert, but okay, it makes sense. It's closer to you. It's self-defense. You're defending your home. You join the battalion of volunteers there in your province, in your city. And so the same pattern. First, regular popular forces. When they failed, guerrilla, the solution. Or that's what they thought. So initially, they were just seizing horses, equipment, and then the first information we have of him leading a party, a guerrilla party in Ciudad Rodrigo, was in January 1809. And his field of action was mainly Salamanca. On this occasion, at that time in January 1809, together with the Portuguese Legion, he was monitoring Ledesma and the authorities there for them not to collaborate with the French. So it was not just attacking or monitoring the French, but also checking that Spanish authorities were not collaborating with them. So controlling the afrancesados. So, and is this constant collaboration with regular forces that was key to his performance. I would like to describe him as an in-between. That's between regular, irregular forces. And just a few months later, in May, his party was integrated in the army of the left and El Duque del Parque. And it is said that in August, he already led 200 cavalry soldiers. And as we can see here, the importance of the cavalry for the guerrilla because of the landscapes. And this reminds me of Broderick's surprise when General Blake asked the British officers on the northern coast for cavalry instead of infantry. He was quite surprised, saying, "Why cavalry? Why?" Yeah. And then while he was moving from La Coruña to the Cantabria, he realized that infantry had no option in those landscapes, that they needed cavalry to fight. And I have gone out of the topic, but okay. Going back to El Charro, he was usually described by his cruelty against the French. And there's a really interesting episode that took place in September 1809. He was informing El Duque del Parque about that, and it was that some French soldiers destroyed the village of Rodas Viejas in Salamanca, and El Charro decided to chase the imperial soldiers, and he put 54 out of 70 to the sword. So this is used as an example of that cruelty that against the French. And at this point, it's important to remember that this kind of performance, reaction, cruelty against the French had been approved and was promoted by authorities. In that instruction para el corso terrestre, published in April 1809, it was said that any means possible could be used against or to react to the barbarous behavior of the imperial forces. So it is not just that they were cruel, but okay, yeah, that might be. But they were also following those instructions. Another important military actions, lots of Battle of Tamames in October 1809, actions around Ciudad Rodrigo when it was sieged by Massena in June 1810. He was supporting Wellington by providing him supplies and provisions when he withdrew from Torres Vedras in the summer of 1810. He was in the Battle of Fuentes de Oñoro in May 1811. He was recapturing Ciudad Rodrigo in January 1812. He was in the Battle of Los Arapiles. And the most important thing that I've got, it's that he was praised by Wellington, who, as we know, he didn't like the guerrilla quite much. but he didn't hesitate to integrate him in his army. So maybe it's because of that in-between nature of him. He was not really guerrilla, he wasn't a typical guerrilla leader. So maybe.
Can I just say, this isn't a follow up and it's not a dreaded rabbit hole, but it's so Wellingtonian, isn't it? Because he needs the guerrilla partly to keep French
Mm.
troops pinned down, partly for the absolutely spectacular levels of intelligence that are being supplied. And yet he still manages to be snarky about so many of them, apart from the ones who sort of, funnily enough, come from a middling kind of background where they've got a bit of kind of wealth behind them and maybe an estate or two. They're the right sort of people, the sort of people that he can get on with. Sorry, rant over. Liam, it's your microphone.
No, I just think it's really interesting. It's this overarching term that we use, and it's purely perspective, isn't it? You know, you talk about Wellington being so scathing to some, and so and giving praise to others. Funny enough, the guys that he gave praise to had seriously helped him out of several pickles, regardless of whether they were regular troops practicing irregular tactics or a more, I guess, I don't want to say standard, but a more traditional guerrilla, a sort of a civilian sort of coming from that civilian background. So yeah, that perspective I think is everything really. Okay, moving on to our next person, Juan Martin Diaz, known as I think you mentioned them, El Empecinado. So yeah, where does he come from? Let's talk about his nickname and also what's his story.
Okay. I must say that Juan Martín Díez, I don't know why, but he's one of my favorite guerrilla leaders. And I would say that he's the epitome of the guerrilla leader. But the curious thing about him is his name. Um, because I think that it also shows the impact the guerrilla has had until today in Spain and among Spanish people. His nickname, El Empecinado, or Empecinado, comes from the nature of a stream, a small river called Botijas, in his own village in Valladolid. One of its main characteristics was its black mud, that in Spanish is called pecinas, and through a word formation process, adding the prefix em ended up in empecinado, that at some point meant dirty, dirty with that mud from the river. The thing is that due to his fame from 1811, that's quite early, the word empecinado started to be used to refer to all the guerrilla leaders. And years later, it gave birth to a new word in Spanish, the word empecinarse. That means persist in, be obstinate, never give in, which is currently in use. And that's connected to his obstinate fight to prevent French occupation. So, in fact, if today you check the official dictionary for the Spanish language, that origin in Juan Martínez Díaz is stated. And that for me is amazing. Um, and just another quick note about that. In October 1808, there was a royal decree that allowed him to use his nickname in official documents and dispatches. And what's curious for me is the date. It was October 1808. So, if I understood it well, he was quite famous already at the end of 1808. So that's pretty interesting for me too. Regarding his story, he was born in Valladolid, in a village, that's Castrillo de Duero, in 1775, in a well-off farmer family. He was illiterate, and pretty young, he joined the Spanish army, in the word of the convention. And it is there where he developed, that's what it is said, an extreme hatred for the French. So as El Charro, he had military instruction. We do not know much about his life when he returned from the war. He got married, and some sources say that he worked collecting taxes for the Duke of El Duque de Osuna. And regarding the reasons behind his participation in the guerrilla, again, Moliner Prada notes the same reason to the one mentioned before, and I fully agree with that. It was just to rebel against the French occupation of his country, his homeland. It's true that there are other theories that by other authors that say that there was a wish to avenge the murder of his best man's son, his wife's murder, but his wife was alive at the end of the war. The abuse of his daughters. But I think that personal suffering was used to construct, or was used to construct the traditional narrative about the guerrilla. So maybe it was something added after to construct that image. It's personal suffering justifying his actions. So some sources note that initially he joined the regular army and participated in the battles of Cabezón and Medina de Río Seco. I'm now talking about the Peninsular War. And just after those disasters, he joined the guerrilla force. So we can see that there is always a pattern. Most of them follow the same pattern. He might have started his guerrilla operations in April, May 1808, intercepting dispatches, convoys, capturing French soldiers around Aranda de Duero, that's Burgos, with 1,000 men. And after being released from prison, because there was a weird or dark episode in between. He was said to have been imprisoned for not having followed the orders of a general regarding the lodging of a lady. So he lodged the lady in his own house, and that those were not the orders. So he was imprisoned. And when he was released, he restarted his party with 30 men, mainly relatives and friends, sorry. And then he extended his field of action to Salamanca and Segovia. His party, Los Descubridores de Castilla la Vieja, was recognized by the Spanish authorities in April 1809. And then at the time, he extended his area of action a bit more, including now Guadalajara and Sigüenza. So from Castilla y León now to Castilla-La Mancha. Both Castiles were included. In 1810, he was fully integrated in the regular army and started operating also next to Cuenca, Madrid, and following Blake's orders in 1811, Aragon y Valencia. So here we can say how extended his area of action was. In 1812, 1813, he had already become the most charismatic guerrilla leader, or that is what it was said, and the one Spanish people most admire at the time. With his 5,000 men, he occupied Cuenca in May 1812. He recaptured Guadalajara in August 1812. He liberated Alcalá de Henares in May 1813. And in June 1813, when Wellington liberated Madrid, Wellington is back, he was also received in the capital city with great honors. So El Empecinado was received there as a hero, and we can read that in the press, in the Spanish press at that time. And we are talking about 1813. So he was already a hero at that time, or represented as a hero. But everything changed at the end of the with the end of the Peninsular War, because of his liberal ideology, and that's important to state because it clashed with the new political situation with Ferdinand VII. He was exiled, captured in 1823, and executed in 1825. So those that helped free Spain from pressing troops then were killed by the authorities at that time. So the myth and legend around him was created, as I said, during the Peninsular War. From the very beginning, the press turned him into a symbol of national independence, of course, as part of that necessary propaganda they needed to enhance morale. And from 1810, that's quite early, he even became the main character of several plays released in Cadiz, theatrical plays, where he was presented as as a symbol of popular resistance, as national hero, and also lots of poems connected to him, praising him. Also in 1811, there is a biography written by Alonso y Ruiz de Cañizares about him. So his biography was already written in 1811, and in which his audacity is praised, and he's presented as the French terror. And then, and this is the part I love, he's turned into a romantic hero, thanks to Frederick Hartman, who was part of the British Auxiliary Legion in 1834 during the First Carlist War. Everything seems to be connected. So the projection of the guerrilla leaders is an important part that should be analyzed and studied. And then, as I said before, Benito Pérez Galdós included him in his national episodes. And Pío Baroja, even, he's comparing him with another guerrilla leader, that's Martín Zurbano. That's a different thing. That's a different story.
Okay, so interesting that your favorite seems to be El Empecinado.
Yeah.
I can't pronounce Spanish fast enough, not at this time of
you
night.
can.
See, I think my favorite might be Don Julian Sanchez.
El Charro.
Yeah, but I'm like I know Luke will approve of that, you know, Luke being the bow and all the rest of it, but yeah, no, I think it's Don Julian for me. But the next one up on our list is Juan Bautista de Mendieta. The amount of editing we're going to have to do to sort of deal with my appalling pronunciation. Now he's also known as, he's got a couple of nicknames, Fray Juan Delica or El Cappuccino. And I'm guessing he wasn't some kind of like 18th century barista. So can we start by please explaining what the heck is going on with all of these nicknames?
Yeah, needs a solution to that problem. Yeah, because we do not know much about his life, just that he was born in Amurrio, Álava, in 1773, and that he entered the Capuchin order in Salamanca in 1798, the nickname of El Cappuccino. And it was then at the time when he entered the Capuchin order and following the order's tradition, as a sign of leaving the old world behind, that he was given a new name. And the new name was Fray Julián de Delica. So that's why two names, two different lives. And then the nickname, the original one, referring to the order he belonged to. That was the thing about the names. And when the Peninsular War broke, sources state that he was in a convent in Toro, Zamora. Well, others say that he was in Valladolid. But anyway, it was Castilla y León. So it seems obvious that in his case, the religious factor moved him to take up arms, like many other priests and even bishops. And I'm sorry, but I have to mention my bishop, that's the Bishop of Santander, Rafael Tomás Menéndez de Luarca, that took up arms. And after that, going back to Fray Julián de Delica, probably it's said that his guerrilla party started in 1809 with around 20 and 60 horsemen, so cavalry again. his area of action being quite reduced, mainly Toro, that's Zamora, where he intercepted a French post over the line of communication, monitoring the line of communication between Zamora and Valladolid, and probably also La Sierra de Gata, that's between Cáceres and Salamanca. And in connection, so he was acting in connection with the Spanish Army of the Center, those troops of the Duque del Parque. And the most interesting episode, or rather the episode that made him famous, was the capture of the French General Franceschi. According to El Correo de Sevilla, that was a Spanish paper, on the 19th of October, according to a dispatch from El Cappuccino to El Duque de Parque, he explained how he had put French generals Ney and Kellerman, my French is terrible, Kellerman, in a difficult position by capturing one of the later best officers, and that was Franceschi. My French, my Italian, terrible. So in the summer of 1809, Marshal Soult decided to send that general with dispatches. Dispatches documents important ones informing José Bonaparte of some immediate plans. But he was not lucky. And on the 29th of June, when Franceschi was heading to Madrid from Zamora, from Puebla de Sanabria, he and those with him were attacked by a Cappuccino party near Toro. Well, they gave in quite quickly, not much resistance. And even if the other guerrilla members wanted to put all the prisoners to the sword, Juan de Delica decided to hand them, both prisoners and documents seized, over El Duque del Parque in Ciudad Rodrigo, who in turn sent everything to la Junta Suprema de Sevilla. And Fray Delica Fray Delica was in charge of that transfer. And once in Seville, he was rewarded by the governing body with the general's sword and 20 horses. So again, here we can see the importance of cavalry horses for the guerrilla. But the episode didn't end there, because El Cappuccino turned into main objective for the French generals who sought revenge. And in fact, he and his party were finally captured in January 1810 in Tordesillas. And while 19 of the guerrillas were sentenced to death, he was taken prisoner to France. And he didn't return until 1815, not getting involved in political military issues anymore, and died 2 years later in Madrid, so 1817. But you have not told us the last nickname. You told us
I'm
three
loving
nicknames.
this. A
There
couple of
was a
guests have
last
started
one.
doing this. They're not letting us off the hook, and they're taking over as the people kind of guiding the interview now. Can I just say, as we've been doing this, I've been working out another one. Luke will not forgive me if I do not offer this one. El burro travieso. Let's see if Liam can work it out.
The handsome devil.
Oh, he wishes. He wishes. Smoothly done there. It's the naughty donkey.
Oh, beautiful.
El burro travieso.
Burro. Yeah. I
Lots
like
of
that.
R letters in there.
Yeah. I did come up with one for you, Zach.
Oh dear.
In the spirit of Chaleco. El Sudadera.
Well, Sylvia's laughing quite hard at that one, so this isn't going to be polite, is it?
I think it's polite. Yeah.
Right? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's just the hoodie.
Yeah, please.
Just the hoodie.
The hoodie. But it's kind of got that kind of, like hidden, the hood type sort of vibes. So I'm down. Anyway, the last two that I came up with are very dull. Are El Intendente. El Intendente.
I should
And
know what that
then-
means.
And then very standard, El Caballero. Caballero? Caballero. Yeah.
Caballero?
Sí.
That's
So the last one, isn't that something to do with like the cavalryman.
Hmm.
Yeah, okay.
Pretty much, I think. I mean,
Intendente. I know that word. I'm going to kick myself.
bearing in mind, full disclosure, I did this in Google Translate, so it might not quite. I don't know how much it picks it up. Well, while we ponder it, lastly on our list tonight, it's the turn of Gaspar de Jaregui, known as El Pasta. Tell us about him and his life during the Peninsular War.
Well, what can I say about him? He was born in a poor family in a hamlet in Arriarangaikoa, that's Beasain, Guipúzcoa. I've got problems pronouncing Basque names. Sometimes they become difficult, but let's try. Initially, he might have helped his parents herding sheep and then become a shepherd himself. That might explain his nickname. So you can see they were not really creative original. So that's why El Pastor, the shepherd. Then by checking his official military record of service, we know that he joined a local guerrilla party in August 1809, formed by 7 people, taking action in the area of El Alto de la Descarga. That's Vergara, again, Guipúzcoa. And between 1809 and 1810, he was said to take part in more than 20 actions against the French in Vizcaya, Guipúzcoa, and Navarra. In December 1810, together with Mina, Espoz y Mina is here again, already commander of the Corso Terrestre Navarra, created the first battalion of Guipúzcoa, that's a light regiment. And in 1812, he was already in charge of 3 battalions, each 1,200 soldiers, and was fully integrated in the 7th Spanish Army under Gabriel de Mendizábal. He then participated in the Battle of Vitoria and in the Battle of San Marcial, although in this case as part of the 4th Army. And he decisively contributed to the defeat of the French troops, whose mission was to relieve the French garrison in San Sebastian. So everything is connected. When the Peninsular War was over, he seemed to retire, but took up arms again on the liberal side during the Liberal Triennium and the First Carlist War. It is not right to state then that the guerrilla leaders, as I said before, were absolutists. Indeed, there is just one I can remember now. That's Jerónimo Merino Cop, El Cura Merino, that we have already mentioned. And that's all I can say about him. Just one thing that I was surprised that the list with key guerrilla figures did not include any from Cantabria. The most important one was Juan López Campillo, because he established contacts with the Royal Navy. And of course, I could not finish without mentioning Popham. Popham should be here. Yeah, so connections with him. Indeed, together, they freed Santander. That might be a different story too. And of course, that's in the book that's going to be released. So
Why does it always come back to Popham?
it's like Wellington, they are everywhere.
As you say, everything is connected, but I do wonder how connected things have stayed. That's a very inelegant attempt at a segue to look at legacy, frankly, because I'm always interested in how different nations remember these conflicts. And, you know, we've looked at these people and their lives and their service to Spain fundamentally.
Mhm.
This is for Spain, well, the clue's in the name, Guerra de la Independencia. You know, it is a war of independence. So, with that in mind, is the war remembered in Spain, particularly? I suppose is the first question. If so, how? My sense is that the Spanish are quite good at this, as my gut would be are the Portuguese, in the sense that you get lots of sort of small but nicely done interpretation centers on battlefields, showing that there is an effort to sort of remember what goes on at these sites. Now it's a bit different for the guerrillas, of course, because you know they are, if they're there at all, they're part of a bigger army, so it's harder to sort of pin it down in quite the right way. So I guess, is there acknowledgement of the guerrilleros? Um, is there a kind of remembrance? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah. Yes, they are remembered. And I think that after the bicentenary, there's a renewed vision. And they are presented as one of those three pillars that contributed to the final defeat of the imperial troops in Spain by draining them. So there is now an intermediate vision perspective, neither heroes nor bandits. So just people behind that myth, that legend, that propaganda and counter propaganda that fought to expel those oppressing forces from their houses, their lands, and the country. So yes, the things, the vision has been renewed, has changed. Um, but I must say that in that new discourse, that new narrative, again, although some women have been included, guerrilla women, they are still forgotten. And even if we remember, for example, Espoz y Mina, if we remember El Empecinado, if people still write and talk about them, that does not happen with, for example, La Vizcaína. And they did the same thing. So yeah, things have changed in connection to the guerrilla leaders that were men, but what about the women that fought too? So yes, I would say that they are remembered and the vision has changed too. So trying to look for that historical data behind the romantic or the legend, the myth used at a time. But lots more need to be done.
Silvia, thank you so much for that. I think that's a really good note to finish on. I was really looking forward to this episode and it has not disappointed. I know our listeners are going to really enjoy it. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to you. I've enjoyed the chat with you.
I think we'll definitely be having you back on in the future to not only correct us on our Spanish pronunciation, but talk about this really important part of the Napoleonic Wars, not just the Peninsular War. Dr. Silvia Gregorio-Sainz, lecturer in English in the English department at the University of Oviedo. Thank you very much. And as always, the Napoleonic Wars podcast will be back very soon.
Adios. What did you think of this episode? If you're listening on Spotify, you can now post your comments and questions, and we'll get back to you. If you want to stay up to date with all the latest news, sign up to our mailing list. The link is in the description. And don't forget that you can enjoy early access, exclusive episodes, online courses, and much, much more on Patreon. The link is in the description. And if you're looking for personalized merch for the Napoleonic nerd in your life, drop us a line on social media and we can design something for you. Shout outs to our patrons who, at the time of recording in late March 2025, were in the mentioned in dispatches tier, Brendan Teeling, Beatrice de Graaf, Lynn Dawson, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Colin Fieldhouse, Jim Getz, Jeff Maple, Robin Brasher, Indiana Fats, Stephen Gillen, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meakin, Mark Anscombe, Rob Coughlin, Bruins Girl, Noah Fink, Miles Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Chris Pramas, Anthony Gumbau, Ian Harding, Anonymous American, James Fluick, Natasha Hobday, Rod Schwager, Chris Kimball, Gary Dennis, Ted Andrews, Richard Anderson, Arthur Forgy, Sam Moore, Wyatt Pollock, Joe Ayres, Darla Vincent, Peter Findlay, Giovanni, Steve Gillen, Jean-Baptiste Van Merlem, Daniel Friedman, Neil Reed, Jonathan Willits, and Wojciech Stefanovic. The Admirals, John Haynes, Mike Guest, Rachel Stark, Mark Duckers, David Priest, David Maxwell, Graham Callister, Sean Sullivan, Stephen Ashworth, Kate Walcombe, Clemens Beman, Reto the Sci-Fi Fan, Tim Day, Jason Morn, and Tim Pritchard. The Chiefs of Staff, that's Adam Coslin, the Marshals, Ryan Diamond and JC Kaiser, the Legion de Scholars, Dan Hazelwood and Bob Burnham, and in the Crown Yourself tier, Emperor of the First French Empire, Todd Campbell, and Duke of Wellington, Laird Campbell. We'll be back very soon, but until then, this has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod. On behalf of myself, Liam, Luke, Josh, and Zoe, take care of yourselves, folks. Stay well. And as always, thank you for listening.